Namaste yogis and lovers of wellness, and welcome back to the Yogi Blair YouTube channel. Today's video is episode 2 of my yoga journey, and if you saw episode 1, I'll link it here just in case, but we started at the very end of the journey. I showed you what my week looks like as a yoga instructor, as that being my job. So I hope you check out that video. It was a good one. Today we're gonna rewind it all the way back to the beginning, and we're gonna talk about what made me start doing yoga and what put me on this trajectory to being this yoga instructor with a passion to help people. But before we get into that, if you don't know who I am, if this is your first time stumbling across my videos, I'm really excited that you're here. My goal is to get to 1,000 subscribers, not for the monetization, not because with 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of watch time, you can start to monetize your channel. It's not about the money. I want to just reach people with my passion. And I am a certified registered yoga instructor, and it is my passion to share yoga and wellness with anybody that needs it, but especially those healing from trauma, which you will learn a little bit more about today and why that is my mission. So please consider subscribing to my channel if you support that mission and that cause. It'd mean the world to me. You can follow me at yogi.blair on Instagram, where I post a few more videos throughout the week on IGTV. And with all of that out of the way, we will get started with today's video. So, talking about what got me started on this path to doing yoga, I started practicing a few years ago, and I'm not going to give exact timelines here for certain reasons that I'll, get into in a minute, but I have been practicing for quite a few years. More recently, in the last 2 years, is when my practice was multiple times a week or every single day, multiple times a day. And that's what got me into teacher training and everything. The first few years of my practice was just your typical what everybody does when they go to yoga. You go once a week or twice a week. You go with a friend and get brunch. And that was really where my practice kind of started. I first heard about the yoga studio that I was attending from a coworker of mine. We were talking and we were just chatting about some things. I think she was going through something at the time, and she said that yoga was the first thing that she went to, and it felt more than just working your body. She said that she felt, it was amazing. It was inspirational. The teacher was inspirational. She said things that made her cry. And I was just so interested in this thing because the only reason that I was crying when I was working out was because everything just hurt. And that was another thing that really piqued my interest about yoga. The only yoga I had ever done at this time was the yoga that was on the Nintendo Wii, with the balance board. I had never really done yoga or really done it in a way to exercise my body, and I was curious how all of this could sort of come together. I was diagnosed around the age of 15 or 16 with fibromyalgia, which is a neurological disease that affects the nerves in the body, and basically your nerves are always sending signals of pain that shouldn't be there. And your body's kind of tricked into thinking that it's injured. And everybody experiences it differently. Some people are trying to link it to being kind of autoimmune, but with a lot of people, there's not inflammation, which is a key indicator of something being autoimmune. I sometimes feel like I did get inflammation when I was dealing with a really bad flare-up back in the day, but I don't really know for sure. But for me personally, fibromyalgia I feel like my body always feels like it's injured. There are muscles, especially in my legs. I used to try to run track in high school, and I was bad at it because my legs were always, beyond the point of being sore, they felt injured. It felt like I pulled every muscle in my legs all at once, even though I didn't. And the fascia, the connective tissue in the body that is over top of the muscle that kind of connects everything together, mine is very stiff. And you'd be like, oh, well, Vanessa, you're a yoga instructor. It shouldn't be stiff. Exactly, it shouldn't, but it is all the time because my fascia is always tight because it always thinks that it's injured. And I believe I was taught by a massotherapist that worked at a chiropractor's office that one of the functions of fascia was many years ago, before we had doctors and before we had casts and splints, if there was an injury to the body, fascia was supposed to get tense and tight to almost act as a splint or a cast to hold you in a stiffer position while that healed. And now obviously we have casts and things where we don't need our body to do that, but that is why we have scar tissue, and that is why we get tense and why it's hard to move after you break an elbow and you need to go to physical therapy, because that's your body's response to help heal itself. Well, mine kind of does that all the time. So that's how my body experiences it. Other people, it might be different, but that's how my body kind of always is and has always been. Since I've started doing yoga more in the last couple years, I will say that my fibromyalgia is not nearly as bad as it used to be. That's not to say that yoga is a cure for fibromyalgia. It can't be cured. It is a chronic condition, but for me, it is extremely manageable. I don't take muscle relaxers anymore like I used to. My doctor, at the age of 15, 16, I was given muscle relaxers to take every night before bed to help alleviate the tension in my body. And they made me really tired. They made me feel really groggy. I had a really hard time in school and in college. I took these all the way up until a few years after college even, to try to just get through this pain. And now I don't take them at all. And I feel so much more awake and more lively. At the age of 15, I was also diagnosed with pretty intense depression and anxiety. I don't always feel so depressed anymore. A lot of times now it just manifests as anxiety. But I was pretty depressed as a kid, and it was really hard. I was taking these muscle relaxers, and then I was given antidepressants, and they both made me really tired. I was on every kind of antidepressant that you can think of. One that really stuck out to me was Effexor. That made me feel like complete garbage. And taking both of those things at the same time, I was exhausted. I felt like a zombie. I struggled, like I said, in school, but even after school when I started working, I struggled at work. My performance was bad because I could not get my mind to work. And also coming off of Effexor, I finally made the choice to just quit taking it. I weaned myself off of it, which you should always consult a doctor before doing anything like that. And it was an intense withdrawal situation. Effexor is, at least at the time when I was taking it, was all of the research that I had done said that people coming off of it had symptoms similar to those coming off of a heroin addiction or a serious drug addiction. And it was really brutal, but I'm glad that I went off of it because my body is very sensitive to medications, and being on all of these medications, taking ibuprofen every day, and all of these things was just not working for me. And that's not to say that if you take medications for depression or for anything that you're wrong. Do what feels right to you. I was super sensitive to, and even Benadryl. I can't take Benadryl without feeling like I'm hungover for a couple days after. So that's just how sensitive I am to everything. And so I don't like taking medications. And so going off of those, I felt really good. I started going off of those a couple years after doing yoga and realizing that I was starting to feel better. And so I started my yoga practice after a very serious and significant relationship ended in my life. And I was going through a divorce at the time. I was married at the age of 22 and going through a divorce by the age of 23. So that is just a general bit of information. I would say that a lot of my relationships growing up were not healthy. And that's not to like attack any of the men that I dated or the boys that I dated in high school. I just feel like in my day and age of dating when I was young, I was never really taught how to communicate. I was never really taught how to have conversations, and I feel like a lot of these men weren't either, and there was just a lot of issues that were had that maybe didn't necessarily need to be had. I'm not going to go into details and name names about which relationships did what, because I don't believe in, airing that laundry on social media. I did deal with some abuse at some point in my life, whether that was a boyfriend, whether that was something. I'm not going to divulge that information here. If you're here for some tea, you're not going to get it, because if you've ever taken the Myers-Briggs personality type, you might know your personality type. There are many different ones. I think there's 16, and I'm an INFJ, which one of the big characteristics of INFJs is how private they are. There are certain things that I am happy to just openly share without getting into detail. And there are things that I don't think are for the internet and the world to see. And that's why I always link my email below. If you ever want to have a conversation with me, I'm happy to have a conversation, but I need to make sure that I trust the people that I give information to, because it's very personal, and that kind of stuff just, I personally, for me, it's not something that I want to just put out in the universe for anybody to see. And it also is just something that I need to do to protect myself as well. So at this time in my life, I was single or going through a divorce, and I was, what was my age at that point? About 23, 24 was when I really started doing yoga. And at this point in my life, I had been through some things. We have the fibromyalgia, we have the depression, the severe anxiety. I did not finish college because I couldn't afford to, and I just wasn't very good at it because of all this chronic pain and depression that made me perform really poorly. And also just really not knowing a good work ethic at the time, because in high school, I feel like you're not really taught those things sometimes, depending on the school that you go to. And I was confused. I was moving back in with my parents, and I just felt like I had failed in a lot of ways, and that I was stupid, and I made these stupid choices in my whole life. At this point, just kind of felt like a lot of terrible decisions. And then there's this added stuff that I had been through with people where there was abuse involved, and I hadn't dealt with it. And now I'm coming up to this point in my life where everything is changing, and there's just this catalyst of this relationship that was supposed to last forever now ending, moving back in with my parents, and I was just like, I need to do something. I need to do something where I can just not think for a minute. And so I started doing yoga. And I started taking classes once a week, and my first class that I ever took was a heated power class, which I did okay. It wasn't too bad. And I just started going with it, and everything that coworker of mine had said, where it doesn't feel like you're working out. You're working hard, your body's working hard, but it doesn't feel like work. And there's this added element of something that you're connected to. And she was right. I had never felt like that, moving my body. That was the first physical movement, exercise, whatever you want to call it, that I had done besides dancing that did not hurt my body. And so I was intrigued, and I kept coming back because it was one of the few things I could do without hurting. And it felt so good because my fascia is always so tight and my muscles are always so tight that stretching them like that, but also sweating and working out and working hard, it just, my mind was at ease for, even if it was just for 60 minutes of my day or an hour and 15 minutes, I felt at ease. And that's not something that I could really say all the time. My mind is always overthinking. I'm always running through scenarios in my head. And I had also not come to terms with this abuse that I had experienced in my life at some point. And this was the first time in a long time that a stranger was able to connect with me, the yoga instructor, doing hands-on adjustments where I felt safe in the hands of a stranger and I wasn't afraid, and it was just an incredible experience. And so that's why I gravitated towards a trauma-sensitive yoga environment, because of my experience and being somebody that was eventually diagnosed with PTSD by a therapist that I was seeing at the time. For me, hands-on adjustments were a way to physically connect with somebody while improving my practice, learning about what a pose should feel like, as opposed to maybe if I was doing it incorrectly, or feeling a stretch in a different way, because sometimes hands-on adjustments aren't about correcting you. They're just about ways of feeling a pose in a different way that you wouldn't be able to feel without that resistance of somebody else manipulating your body. And the hands-on adjustments were just, I love them personally, even though I do have PTSD and I do sometimes get a little jumpy around people. That was just something that I craved and I wanted. I wanted that connection. I wanted that attention. And I think for a lot of people that might be the case, but for some people it's not. For some people that are going through post-traumatic stress or coming out of an abusive relationship, those hands-on adjustments can be terrifying. And I know that there are some people that won't go to yoga because they don't want that. And that's why I use consent cards in my classroom. That's why I teach from a trauma-sensitive standpoint, because I've been there and I know what it's like, and I know what it feels like to be afraid of people putting their hands on you without your permission, and I get it. And so that is why I decided to move into trying to teach from a trauma-sensitive standpoint and doing as much research as I could about trauma sensitivity. But at this point in my life, I'm just taking classes and going once a week. Once a week turned into a couple times a week, and I'd go with friends and I'd tell all my friends, oh my gosh, you need to come try this. And that brought me up to the point of moving to Fort Wayne, Indiana. Throughout my entire time of practicing yoga in Ohio, it wasn't very consistent. It wasn't always steady because my main goal was working. I was working 40 plus hours a week, sometimes minimum wage, sometimes just a little bit more than minimum wage. And so I was tired a lot. I was on my feet all day. Sometimes I was working 2 jobs, and I didn't get to have that luxury of practicing as much because sometimes I was just tired at the end of the day. But I did always try to go. I tried to go at least once a week. And yeah, I really just fell in love with the practice. And for those first couple years too, I would say that a lot of my practice was around the physical movement, because with coming out of all of these traumatic things or physical ailments or mental illness or whatever you want to call it, a lot of my coping mechanisms stemmed around physical movement and food, and I would try to control things about my physical appearance in order to feel some sense of control because of what I had been through. So for a lot of my beginning stages of yoga might not have been from the healthiest standpoint, and that's just me being completely open and honest. So yeah, at first it was the physical movement, and I understood a little bit of what it was to have that feeling in Shavasana where you're meditating, even though I didn't necessarily understand at the time what meditation was. and that connection with other human beings, and that feeling of just not being judged. That was another thing that I really loved about the practice, was I could go in there looking like a hot mess, or I could come straight after work with my hair and makeup done, and no matter what, nobody cared. My practice probably wasn't that cute to start out with. I doubt that my poses were that great, but nobody cared. People were loving, they were kind, they were supportive, they wanted to help you. If you had a question on a pose, they were passionate and ready to help you get into that. And it was a great experience, and it was the first experience, I think, in my life where I didn't feel judged. And it was the first time that I felt like I could just be who I wanted to be without worrying if people were going to assume anything, or worry if people were going to judge my appearance or my gender or anything. I could walk in there and say the kookiest thing and nobody would care. And that's why I gravitate also towards yoga, because I see students of all different walks of life and all different personalities, and that's what I love about it, because we can all get together and enjoy the practice. So that's where my practice started. Next week we'll kind of move into when we moved to Fort Wayne and when my practice really started to pick up after quitting my job and taking a year off of doing any kind of work to just kind of find myself. Because after I met my husband, obviously between moving to Fort Wayne and this start of my practice, and he was a huge driving force in this entire thing. When I met him, I was still extremely broken. When I met him, I was timid and anxious and scared, and just, I didn't know what a relationship was supposed to look like, because I had honestly never had a healthy one. And then I met my husband, and he was the first man to ever make sure that I was comfortable and make sure that I was okay with the pace that we moved at, and that I felt safe at all times, and to make sure that I was just comfortable at all times. I did not understand that love ever in my life, and I don't want to get emotional about it, and I know I say in my videos all the time how my husband did this and this and it's cute, and oh, he got me these leggings and he's a great husband, in my last video for Valentine's Day talking about Fabletics. And I know I've mentioned so many times all the just cute little things he does, but I never really talk about the big things that he does, because again, we're private people and we don't need to put this stuff out on the internet. But if you don't feel safe in a relationship, or if you're questioning if you don't feel safe in a relationship, when you first feel that safety, it breaks you in a way. And he really truly was the driving force behind this whole thing, because he was so supportive and so incredibly amazing the entire way. When I said I wanted to teach yoga, he was 100% for it. And it was just, I've never felt supported like that before by somebody that wasn't my family in my life. He was just always incredible and supportive, and always is and always has been. And yeah, so that's the beginning of the journey. Next week, I already said, we're going to talk about more. If you are in a relationship that is questionable, or if you are dealing with abuse of any kind, whether it is physical, mental, verbal, sexual, any abuse at all, I'm going to link I know there are people that watch in different countries. So first we'll link the US hotline here. I'm trying to think what kind. I know the UK, I have some people, so we'll link that hotline here, or maybe here. And I think Germany, I honestly don't know if any of these will coincide. We'll link here. Canada, we'll link here. And I think those are the main countries where people are watching my channel. Hotlines for domestic violence. If you are dealing with something, please try to reach out. I know how hard it is. I know it's not easy. I know it's horrible, and I get it. And if you are going through something, if you don't feel safe, please call a hotline, or please do what you can to stay safe. I know it's not easy, and I know people love to victim blame and judge people for staying in relationships. And I was lucky to get out of a situation pretty early on, but some people aren't as lucky. And my email is always available. If you ever have a story to share, I'm happy to hear it. I will always respect your privacy as much as I respect mine. And if you share a story with me, if you want me to keep it between us, I'm happy to do that. If you want me to share something, a story that you might be afraid to share, but you want me to talk about it, I'd be happy to do that. If you need to talk, I'm here. Just send me an email. My email's always linked down below. And that's all I have for today, guys. I know that that's a little more intense than I usually like to get here, but I always talk about trauma and how I'm passionate about helping people that deal with PTSD, but I've never really told you my situation. And that was a very vague background, and that's the way I want to keep it. But yeah, that's why I'm so passionate about this, because I've been there and I know. So I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your week. Stay tuned for yoga on Friday. I will see you next week talking about when my practice really had this change and when I decided to be a yoga instructor. So we will get into that next week. I hope you all live happy, live free, live well. Namaste.